This is AUGforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Repay. Repay offers omni-channel integrated payment solutions for Acumatica users. Whether you are making B2B payments or collecting them, Repay is your full-service payments provider. Power up your payments to empower your business and accelerate the AP and AR payment flow through one seamless integration. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is Velixo. Velixo is an award-winning provider of Excel-based reporting solutions for Acumatica. With Velixo, you can build financial, project, and other business reports in Excel with live Acumatica data in just a few minutes and get the answers you need. If you know Excel, you can do it. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. I mean guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Thursday, February 10th, 2022, and this is episode number 68 with Neil Cantral. Neil, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Tim.
Yeah, so maybe we can start off with Neil's origin story. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to college, if you did go to college, and that first job out of college? Let's kind of set the stage for Neil's background here.
All right. Well, I'm originally from Yakima, Washington. It's on the desert orchard side of Washington State. And so grew up there and then stayed on the east side of the state and went to Washington State University over in Pullman. And that's kind of where I stumbled into IT. Originally went to Wazoo with the intention of kind of pursuing something in like medicine or biology. And had no idea what an ERP was at the time.
I haven't met anyone yet who did during college.
Yeah, like
just put you in the column with everyone else so far.
Yeah, no one's ever like, yeah, just like ERP is this big sexy thing. I really want to go after that.
But you discovered IT in college. I think that's interesting. So did I.
Yeah.
And I feel like most people don't, at a four-year university. Usually it's like a more of a homegrown garage kind of a thing. That's interesting.
Yeah, I've always been on the techie side of things. And I think that's kind of how I got my first gig was in our residence halls. They were trying to pilot a program to offload some of the IT like help requests. So they created a thing called like the resident technology assistant. So it was kind of like in tandem with the RAs, but they would handle just all of your tech issues. Now that laptops were pretty much mandatory for most like coursework. So there were a lot of issues with like just getting your laptops working or connecting to the internet, like in the residence hall. I would just be kind of like your go-to, just like your Geek Squad guy, like living in your residence hall.
So it's basically a student job.
Yeah.
And was it a good job for studying when things were quiet?
Oh, it was great because I think I think we got room and they paid for the room basically for the year while I did it. So it was a pretty good deal where I didn't have to pay to stay in the residence hall, and I just had to kind of provide IT support as needed. Worked out really well.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had a similar experience at UCLA in the computer lab, starting off just in the computer lab. And it was, yeah, one of those jobs where if it was quiet, you just got to study. It's pretty easy going. Then I moved my way back into the behind the door. There was like a door behind the help desk. And that was real offices were with full-time people. And I worked on a programming, like an open source programming project back there. But same here, that's like where I kind of discovered the IT side of things. It wasn't necessarily in any classes, although I did some programming, but it didn't really take hold. It was in the real world working a student job for me as well. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it started out as just like kind of like an experimental program for the university. And it worked out really well. But then summer came around and I was looking for work. And the IT group that kind of oversaw this program were like, hey, you want to come work for us this summer? We'll teach you the ropes. And I was like, sure, why not? Paid good money and ended up just running with it and kept continuing along that path. And ended up just working part-time my entire tenure at Wazoo.
So then you make it to graduation, assuming, and do you stay on there for a little while, or do you go get a job, like a real job after school?
Stayed on for a while. I ended up not graduating at Wazoo, but I still stayed on for a while afterwards because it was still a good gig. Bounced around to a couple of their different IT departments over there, still kind of doing like tech support and like kind of desktop support, doing a lot of installs of SAP and some of their other disparate programs that they had between the different like kind of siloed departments. Ended up, I didn't realize it at the time that I was working a lot with their ERP systems, their finance and admin section.
So Wazoo was running like the big R3 or R4, I forget what it's called, the big SAP.
I'm not entirely sure. I remember installing the programs. I think they had SAP and Sage, and I don't remember the exact products at the time.
Interesting. Okay.
I'd just be the guy installing things and like just doing like some basic troubleshooting when their clients wouldn't start up.
Okay. So you're touching ERP, but you're not in school anymore, but you don't yet realize it's ERP.
Exactly. I had no idea what they did. And I just made sure that they could log in.
Okay. So, interesting.
Yeah. Then eventually I moved back to Yakima. And I get a job at the local hospital. And that's where I got a lot more involved. And I would be entering into like their finance module. They had their own kind of version of their ERP. I'd be entering in the charges that like for all the little supplies that you would get. Like during a visit to the ER, for example, they like have all the barcodes for all the products that they use during that visit, and I'd be the one hand entering them into their system at night.
And normally, I think a hospital calls it an EHR system. Is that right?
It is.
Did that acronym come across your brain yet there, or not quite yet?
It was just starting to. I was like hearing rumblings, but I didn't quite really understood what it was. But when I joined, they were in the process of implementing an EHR, because I think this was around the time where there was a mandate that like you had to get it now or you might lose some funding.
Okay, but you're interacting with systems, and
Yes,
it sounds like still on the front end. You were installing clients earlier. Now you're entering data in, so you're getting a little closer to the core of it, but you're still mostly dancing around the front end of it.
Yep, still just dancing around the front end. I'd like because I was the help desk at the hospital. I'd kind of be the initial kind of like, I'd collect bug reports and things like that, and like send them off to like the various support teams. So I was getting more familiar with it, but still didn't really know what I was walking into.
Now, backing up real quick, I'm glancing at your LinkedIn profile as you're walking through this. You've got management information systems on your WashU time. So you were touching, I mean, that's like as ERP as you can get from a studying point of view, I think. But
right,
like what were you learning about compared to what you know ERP to be now? Like, was it two different things, or was it really the same kind of thing?
at the time I was like learning kind of like the base concepts of accounting and databases, and did a little bit of programming. But it was like ERP was one of those vocab words that we had to memorize for an exam, but we never really interacted with it or did anything other than like, this is what businesses use. They all use ERPs. And it was basically
Got
just
it.
answer the vocab word type of concept at the time.
Yeah, I think it's funny how, academics is just notoriously disconnected from the real world, right? I mean, even their degree, management information systems that you usually see, it's not called ERP. They've got their own name for it. But like,
Yeah,
at least in the mid-market, it's not called MIS in the real world. It's called ERP.
yeah, exactly. It's such a broad term that like it doesn't seem to really apply to the real world very cleanly.
So you're working at the hospital, mostly entering data, but do
And
you
I'd be
turn the
fielding a
corner
lot of
there?
support calls. And
Okay.
so I was still mostly on the desktop support side of things, of just making sure users can use whatever system they're trying to use.
And so is it there that you kind of turn the corner into the back end side of things, or is it the next job that you
That's the next
discover
job.
the real ERP side of things?
So it was like after the hospital, I made the decision that I wanted to go finish up my degree. So I finished that online through Western Governors University. And that's just a continuation of like their flavor of MIS. It's still mostly just accounting principles, like making T charts and balance sheets, and like doing a little bit of like database management type stuff. But nothing more than like, this is how to write a select statement.
Okay, but you're getting into the database there. At least you're writing a select statement.
Yeah. And so I graduated from WGU, and from there I stumbled into my next job, which my roommate from college, like her mother worked at Wilmar Corporation, and she reached out to me and was like, hey, we got this job. Do you think you be interested? And first I look at the job description and I'm like, oh, well, there's no way I'm qualified for any of this. I don't know what EDI is. I don't know what half of this stuff is on this job description. And I let them know, and they're like, oh, just don't worry about it. Come in and interview anyways. So drive over to the west side, to Renton, just south of Seattle. And that's where I just interviewed with them. And it turned out they were really looking for kind of like a desktop support type person, and somebody to manage their EDI transactions. So that'd be like their purchase orders, their advanced shipment notices, and invoices that would go out.
So Wilmar Corporation, that's where you're at now. That's where you entered the Acumatica world. Give us a background on Wilmar. Who are they and what do they do?
Okay. So Wilmar's a supplier of kind of like specialty tools, hand tools, shop equipment that serve like the automotive industry. So we're a distributor, and a lot of our customers are in kind of like automotive wholesale, hardware retail, farm and fleet, industrial wholesale kind of channels. So we sell pretty much anything you would use to work on your car.
Okay. And you sell wholesale, you said primarily, right?
Right.
Okay.
So B2B exclusively.
Okay. So you get in the door there and you're still kind of on the front end, at least when you get in the door, managing transactions, things like
Yeah.
that. And when you get in the door, are they on Acumatica yet or still on a previous system?
No, so we're still on our legacy system, Commerce at Work. I think it was a kind of like an offshoot of Infor, if I'm remembering correctly. And so when I joined in 2016, they were in the implementation stage with Acumatica. So at that time, I think when I first logged in, it was on version 5 of Acumatica.
Oh, perfect timing. You were right in the middle of the implementation.
Yeah, so I missed all so they were choosing vendors at the time. So they had just chosen the WMS when I walked in the door, and they were in the implementation stages. But I mostly stayed out of that for at least a few months before I really dove into it. But in those first few months, I spent a lot of time kind of getting to know EDI, which ended up being the perfect position to kind of understand their business and its needs as a whole.
And that was 2016 that you started there. You said they were kind of in the middle of implementing Acumatica. Then when did they go live on Acumatica?
Well, we had a bit of a rocky implementation, and we ended up backing out. We changed VARs, and we didn't actually go live until June 2019.
June of 2019. Wow. So you got a few year implementation going on there.
Yeah. So I joined in the early stages of the first implementation. We did not do a good job of capturing our requirements or training at the time, and there was some turnover in some key positions. And so that really set us back. And some of our customizations ended up being a lot more difficult than we initially anticipated.
And if you can, about how big is Wilmar? Is this like a $10 million company, a $50 million company, hundreds of people, dozens of people?
Let's see. Say it's probably around the 150 million. About 150 employees.
Okay. So that doesn't surprise me then that you hit some snags in the implementation. 3 years sounds crazy, but on the other hand, it's probably not as unusual as people might think, especially for a company that's a decent size like that.
Yeah, and I think we tried to make Acumatica fit the processes of our legacy ERP, and I think that might have set us back a bit.
Ooh, I love that point. Tell us more about that. I've seen that before. You were trying to just make it do exactly what you used to do instead of stepping back and maybe re-architecting business processes.
Yeah. So our philosophy at the time was we wanted to make it as air quotes painless as possible by just kind of side grading and just replicating all of our processes exactly. And I think that was very difficult because I don't think we really fully grasped at the time just how fundamentally different Acumatica functioned from our legacy system.
Interesting. Huh. I like using the DNA analogy, the double helix strand. You've got two strands of well, I don't understand it completely, but I know when I look at the models of it, there's like two strands that are bound together, but they twist. And point is that there's two of them, and even though they're not like completely straight right next to each other, they twist around. And I like using it as an analogy of there being two sides to the implementation. One is you've got to understand the business process. The other side, though, is that you need to understand the new system. And it's almost like two completely different worlds. One is you need to understand the business. And even from your angle, that was probably something you were learning. But then you also need to understand the new system. You need to understand Acumatica and how it does things. And where you land is never like completely just on the business process side or just completely on the way Acumatica does things. There's always some middle ground, and you don't necessarily make it work exactly the way Acumatica wants to do it, or exactly the way your business wants to do it. I feel like there's some compromising you make, and you land somewhere between the two. Was that your experience there, where you realize there's two
Definitely.
sides to it instead of just the way we want to do things, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think with me being so fresh and new to it, I was learning both the legacy system and Acumatica at the same time. So I'd step in and I kind of had an outside perspective, and I'd be just kind of scratching my head. It was like, why are we doing it this way? This doesn't make sense. And it's like probably the worst thing you can say to me is like, well, that's the way we've always done it. Yeah, that's just
Practically, how did you do it? Like, did you find if you dedicated certain days of the week to understanding the business and other days of the week to understanding Acumatica, or was it more of just one process? You would kind of flip back and forth between both of those modes simultaneously?
Flopping back and forth simultaneously, because I found that a lot of our knowledge is really siloed with like specific key people in the company, and they weren't always things were not always explained to them in a way that they understood how Acumatica functioned. And so it would be a lot of back and forth of I'd be going through like all of the documentation and some of the like the Acumatica University content, or even just on like my little local test instance of just kind of going through and just really trying to understand how some of these processes work. And then I'd go and I think I'd be showing off something really cool to the subject matter expert on it. And then then we'd sit there and I would kind of walk them through it, and then they would just sit there and kind of like poke holes in it and be like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? It doesn't do this. How do I do this? And so it ended up being kind of like a dialogue back and forth with these subject matter experts.
Now, you said local instance. I got to ask you there, was that something someone told you you could do, or was that something you figured out you could do and went and did it on your own?
I figured out how to do it on my own, because at the time there were not many resources for Acumatica. I think your blog was one of the few resources that was at least Googleable at the time. Spent a lot of time on your blog because kind of your journey as you were blogging in like 2015 was kind of mirroring a lot of the same kind of path that I was moving forward.
The reason why I asked that is you're painting this picture here, maybe without realizing it, of someone who's just willing to get their hands dirty and get things done. And so I that little point you made there about installing your own local instance, it's not like that was on the project plan. It sounds like it's like that's something you figured out and you just went and did it. It's not like you had this big grand roadmap that included Neil installing Acumatica locally so he could show things off to subject matter experts. It's almost like something you stumbled onto. And it sounds like that was maybe, well, tell me if that's right. Was that a key part to being able to flip between the two different modes of not just the way we've always done things, but maybe showing an alternate way of doing things?
Oh, absolutely. And kind of funny, that's just kind of how I approach most problems is I just roll up my sleeves and dive in, and worst case I just blew up a sandbox, so no harm, no foul.
I feel like that's why that local environment is so key, right? Because there's no fear. What are you going to hurt? It's all local.
Exactly. And like, because before it was like I always wanted to test things, but it was in our kind of like our main test environment where there'd be like other consultants working on things or other people testing things. And it's like, I always had this fear of like getting in the way, but it's like, you know what, I'm sure I could do this myself and just kind of like contain any damage that might happen.
And so I'm still going to key around this point where you install a local instance. But when that happened and when you did that, were you at a point in the implementation where things were stalled, or were you already unstuck by that point?
I think we were stalling out because one of our main customizations that we had a lot of trouble with was our EDI customization. And I really needed to know the nuts and bolts of how is a sales order created? Like how does it go through the logic of selecting the correct unit price and discount and all of that. And the best way I could do that was by firing up a local instance and just kind of walking it through step by step, spending a lot of time with that inspect element and writing a lot of just blind SQL queries. Just seeing how does the data change if I click this.
That's interesting to me because I think that happens a lot in implementations where you get stuck, and how you get unstuck is not necessarily have a meeting and build a project plan. You know, you can do that, but sometimes you do that and it doesn't work. Then you try it again, maybe a couple months later. And after that second time, it's like no one has any confidence in the third or fourth time, right? But
exactly.
You seem to get unstuck just by just working through the details. Okay, I don't necessarily know the answers yet. I don't maybe even have a timeline yet of when this is going to get done. I'm not setting a go live date, but I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm working through details. Would you say that's the way you got unstuck?
Oh, most of the time. Because I found that a lot of people don't really understand how Acumatica functions under the hood, or necessarily what's happening like in the database. And it's one thing if I can see something on the screen, but what is it actually doing? If I try and pull a query on this or a report on this, how do I know that what I'm seeing on the screen is the right answer? And that was the only way I could get it.
This is great. I love hearing this. I feel like too, during an implementation, well, first, it looks like your current title is system administrator there. Is that right?
Right.
But you were not hired as system administrator.
No.
So you just came in during an implementation and eventually you came out the other end, that messy implementation as system administrator. And I feel like that's a very common story that you didn't necessarily have the qualifications, at least in your mind. You had the MIS degree, but you weren't like super well versed in ERP, but you had a willingness and a curiosity to learn. And I feel like that's the most important thing.
Oh, definitely. I'm still a big proponent of the college degree isn't all that necessary. It's more about just getting exposure and just kind of relentlessly chasing after answers, and like just not being afraid of failure and not settling for I don't know, but let me find out.
Relentlessly chasing after answers. I like that. I've been wanting to go through some of these podcast episodes and find the quotes. There's one of them, relentlessly chasing after answers. I like that. So you said EDI customization a little while ago. Tell us more about that. Was this a EDI like B2B gateway, or I can't remember the other Acumatica EDI ones right now, or this was truly your own customization?
This is truly our own customization. I don't think like there are products out there now that would fulfill this need, but I don't think they were available at the time, or if they were still in their infancy of getting integrated with Acumatica. But we also have just a in-house kind of EDI system to begin with. So it made sense for us to customize at the time. So this customization, basically, we receive electronic POs, for example, from a customer. Our system translates it into a CSV, and then we needed a tool to take that CSV of all of the purchase order information and to create a sales order with it. And you're still using that today? Is it basically a customization project in Acumatica? Yep. Still using it today and still constantly. I think we just approved getting ready to approve another work authorization for more improvements to it. Interesting. What about the, I'm very out of date on EDI. There's some like official thing you pass it off to. Is it a gateway, or is it what actually does the communication in the
like over the internet with whoever's on the other side of it?
There's a couple different options. So there's like an AS2 connection where it's like a direct connect, but typically most people use a VAN, and it'll be like a company, kind of like an SPS Commerce, or for example, that would then like kind of you send your data to them, and then they will take that data and send it to the recipient, and sometimes make any kind of translations or transformations of the data to fit their systems.
So who's the VAN in your case?
We don't really have like one in particular. It's more based off of our customers and what they use. We have a bunch of different methods to connect with our customers.
Interesting. I think that, so since you've been in the details, I'm curious to learn from you on this. The theory of EDI is that there's this master XML format that can handle anything. And as long as you do all the data gyrations on your end to get things into that master format, then it just runs smoothly on the other side. In practice, do you find that to be the case, or are there nuances? And it almost sounds like there are, because there's multiple VANs depending on your customer. What's the case for you?
So it's supposed to be kind of, EDI has kind of various standards, and I think most people treat them as guidelines rather than rules.
That's a good way of putting it.
Every customer has their own little nuance of how the data needs to be presented, or what fields they use or don't use. Some have different definitions of something that supposedly has a set definition of what it means. So there's a lot of work with mapping and translating, and a lot of accommodation has to be made on a case-by-case basis.
Interesting. Yeah. So the theory is you only have to understand things up until the VAN, and the VAN takes it from there. But it sounds like in practice, you really need to know how it gets consumed on the other end for you to prepare it properly.
Yeah. And a lot of the time that they will have other organizations or departments that will have a spec that will list out those requirements. But even then, it's not always clear, because maybe a buyer will send something and not really know what the actual meaning of the code that they sent means. So there's a lot of nuance, and just kind of, you have to kind of know each customer and what their tendencies are.
So tell us more about, let's dive in more on this. Tell us more about the customization. I would assume that on the one hand, it's just creating places for you to store a bunch of these EDI things in Acumatica. And then on the other hand, it's moving data, generating CSV files. How does it work? What does it do for you?
Well, so the original intent was that I think that the customization would handle a lot more of this. But what we ended up going with and going live with was a solution where we have an in-house program that would create these CSVs of the translated data, and then insert them directly into some custom tables in Acumatica's database. And then we take the data from those tables, and the customization will then take the inserted data and then create a sales order.
Oh, almost like your own import scenario.
Pretty much, yeah. It's just a complicated import scenario.
No, that makes sense. You've got like a staging area, but what about the part that takes it from a CSV file? Do the files land in a folder like over an FTP connection? How do they arrive at your door?
So they arrive at our door various ways, but they all end up in one central just kind of location. And then there's a program that will kind of iterate through those CSVs and then delete them when it's done reading the translated file and then inserting it into the database.
So an outside program, that's not part of your Acumatica customization project?
No. Created by us. It just does the heavy lifting.
And that makes sense to me. I mean, moving data around is not something that customization projects, in my opinion, are good at. like scheduling stuff, to just move data. That's more of a data tool job. So it makes sense to me
Right.
that that would be outside. Interesting. So how then does it, what about the other way? That's stuff coming back in. For stuff going back out, is it basically the same process in the reverse? You've got this outside tool that puts it in the location it needs to go?
Yeah. So that same customization will, well, originally that same customization would also send, an event that would trigger an outside program to generate the outbound files. We've scaled that back down, so now the customization is almost exclusively just the inbound portion, and then it contains the data structure for some of the outbound data, like for the DAX and whatnot.
Adding fields to screens so you could populate stuff that you don't have a home for normally.
Yep, adding fields and tables so that we can have all the data that we need to create that output file.
And I got to ask also, are you running Acumatica or hosting Acumatica in your own environment in order to have database access?
Yes, we're on-prem, and I don't know how anyone lives without
it. I've heard the same thing from anyone else who is on-prem. And I love the fact that you can deploy Acumatica where you want, even though the majority of their customers are SaaS, and that's the trend these days. It's such a huge point that often gets overlooked, that you can deploy on-prem if you want to. And having that flexibility, in my opinion, is a big important thing about Acumatica longer term. When the trend dies down and eventually flips back the other way, I think that's very important for Acumatica, over the next 10 to 20 years. So that's interesting.
And during some upgrades, when I'm watching the database scripts just run, I'm kind of sitting back in my chair, maybe we really should look at moving to SaaS, but
yeah, then the upgrade is someone else's problem. I
agree. But having that direct access to SQL is so nice. I can really cut down and just fix a lot of stuff myself without having to rely on Acumatica support for things where I know what the problem is. I just need to make like one little tweak and I can reprocess something if needed.
Sure. Well, that's cool. I like hearing the EDI stuff. That's interesting. Sounds like you went live in 2019, so you've been live for a few years or so. What were some of the other things that were kind of key? Sounds like EDI was the big one. Were there any other customizations or ISV products that you ended up using?
Yeah, so I think the next biggest kind of hurdle that we needed that held back one of our previous attempts to go live was inventory allocations. So I think we're one of the few companies, of at least anyone I've talked to, that actually requires stock allocation. I think you can find under the sales order preferences, there's a little checkbox on there. So basically, as soon as an order is created, it will allocate the order. But the big issue that we had,
I think this is an SA order type. An SO order type, you put in a sales order and it doesn't reserve the inventory for the order. An SA order type, you put it in and it immediately reserves the inventory for that sales order, right?
Yep. So we use the sales order with allocation SA order type, and that caused a lot more problems than we initially realized, because there was a replan back orders feature somewhere in Acumatica but turns out we didn't read the little fine print that it only works for the SO order type.
Oh.
So that was a requirement that we didn't realize until the 11th hour, and that was one of the things that was considered a low priority for us to investigate.
So you want it to replan. So you don't want it to necessarily be first come, first serve. Whoever put the order in gets the inventory allocated. You want to replan, and according to some order hierarchy of priorities, who's going to get the stuff that's available.
We do use first come, first serve. So the issue that we had with the require stock allocation is that if we got because we bring in about like 1,100 containers a year, I think was last year's. We're bringing a lot of containers. And so our inventory levels for inbound are all over the place. And if it takes us a couple days to process an order, 10 containers might have arrived with product that could go on that order. So we have to have the ability to go back and add additional product to an order that after it was initially created. And there's no tool.
Re-describe that. I didn't fully get that. So you have containers coming in. Well, I guess first, what needs to go back out? Does the whole order need to go out at the same time?
Yeah. So basically we try to ship as much as we can on that first shipment, just freight costs and all that, and better fill rates. And,
okay.
And so more containers are always coming in, and we have a lot of out of stock products, or for whatever reason, we need to get more product on these orders. But there's no tool to do that in Acumatica after you initially created an SA order. That was it. You could manually go into the order and allocate it manually by hand. But when we bring in a container, it could apply to a couple hundred orders.
So yeah, you might be thinking you're going to ship order number 1, and then order number 2, all of a sudden a bunch of stuff arrives and you realize we could ship a lot more in order number 2. Do you have a situation where you take from order number 1, or is it just that you need to be able to allocate what's now available to order number 2?
That situation does pop up, and that's another area where we don't have a good solution for if we need to kind of spread inventory out around. Because right now we're still kind of using the base Acumatica behavior of the next order line that you try to allocate just gets all of the available inventory. And then it'll move on to the next line, give it all the available inventory kind of thing.
As you're entering it.
Right.
So then what does the customization do there? Or did you go with the customization to help you with the replanning?
Well, so there's still no real tool for us for replanning, but let's say we get a container in and it needs, it'll look at our customization, gives us a list of all open orders that have unallocated quantity and there's quantity available. So it goes through just line by line, and it'll allocate whatever it can based off of whatever sort order and priorities we choose.
It just lets you see it, or it actually does the allocation on the back end?
It actually does the allocation.
Okay. So it's a tool for allocating stuff that just came in that didn't have a home.
Yep.
And I'm just curious. I was like hearing details. What's the priority? Like, let's say you have a container that just came in and it's got a quantity of 50, whatever they are, tools, and you've got 10 different orders and they each need 20. How do you determine who gets those 50?
Well, I say 95% of the time, it is just oldest to newest order. That way, any like back orders that have been waiting for this product can get filled and get out the door. But there's always some nuance to that. It's never just oldest to newest. There might be like, if we have a special rollout going on, some orders, we have the ability to change the order priority. So we could bump an order up in priority to make sure that those get product first, or we could set certain orders to have like no priority so that everything will get allocated before they do, because maybe it's a future ship date thing and we expect we'll get product before the next time it needs to ship.
So both the order date or order number and order priority are a factor in that algorithm.
Right.
Then do you also have the ability, is there like a staging screen, kind of like an import scenario where you could override it before you process it, or this thing just automatically runs every night or something?
Yeah. So it's just like an import scenario. You can just hit process all if you want to. You could go in and check individual lines if you wanted to as well. We'll sometimes do that for more sensitive product and during COVID times, that has become a higher priority of making sure that specific orders get at least some.
So it is a manual process that has to be triggered. It doesn't run on a schedule.
We could put it on a schedule, but we don't, just to capture some of those more nuanced decisions.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's a regular processing screen. So you could add a schedule to it if you wanted to.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good point about COVID times. Yeah, I don't know anyone who's just running an automated schedule these days with all the supply chain challenges. Interesting. No, I appreciate those details because, I love hearing details about customizations that people have done. There's always other people out there looking to do similar things, right? And they can reach out to you, at least have a better starting point instead of having to build from scratch what they're trying to do. What about any other major customizations or ISV products that you ended up going live with?
And so because of the amount of containers that we bring in, we have PC Bennett's containers as well. And that helps us kind of track and manage our containers and eventually their landed costs.
So what does that thing actually do? Like, is it just managing the containers, or is it also telling you what's in the containers as they're on their way in?
So basically, we build the container with that tool. So we will create the purchase orders, and then you can then build a container. You attach whatever purchase orders or purchase order lines you want to the container. And then you can create additional information like tracking numbers or estimated receipt dates and that kind of thing. So then you can see what products are on the water. Like basically once you get you can set different statuses for the container to track when it's on the water. It puts it into like a virtual in-transit warehouse for us. And then when you can attach landed costs to that specific container, and it will help split out the exact landed cost by however you split it up by, like whether it's like duty, freight, insurance, handling, etc.
That sounds interesting. So yeah, and it's a virtual warehouse, so I'd have the option to use a GL account that's either on my books or off my books.
Right.
That's cool. And then receiving time, does it also get involved on the purchase receipt where you can just say receive the whole container and it does the regular receiving transaction to bring it into inventory?
That's correct. So you'd when you do get the container in, we have a process where we'll manually go through and check the quantities, bring them back up and adjust them like on the container for like the received quantity, can complete the receiving, and then you can process all the landed costs on a container level.
And then I my limited experience with international shipping is that stuff happens between point A and point B. Is there like a damaged goods option at time of receipt, so you can just write stuff off, or do you have to bring the whole thing in inventory?
That I'm a little murky on the details, but there are options to like show, like you can adjust the exact quantity that you actually received, but I am murky on the details.
Well, that's cool. It sounds like you guys had some substantial stuff for going live. Let's keep going. Was there another one, a customization or ISV product?
And then we have Savant for our WMS. But we're kind of unique in that we have not fully implemented the WMS. So we're still running around with don't know how much is exactly in each location at any given point in time.
Like we're doing cycle counts, physical counts, that kind of thing.
Yep. So we still do an annual physical count.
And is everything primarily coming in off the water to one warehouse in Washington, or do you have multiple places up and down the coast that things land at?
We just have the one location. Thankfully, makes it a lot simpler.
And then from there, you go out to your wholesale customers also from that one location, or do you then have like intermediary warehouses in between?
Just straight from this warehouse to their warehouse. We do a little bit of drop ship, but for the most part, it's straight to the customer from our warehouse.
So your main complexity is when it's on the water and all those EDI transactions, making it flow as easily as possible.
Yep.
Well, that's cool. What about looking forward? So it sounds like you sort of changed your trajectory, from what you originally intended to do to what you're doing now. Sounds like you've been running on Acumatica for a few years. What's on your radar these days, and maybe projects you'd like to do?
Well, so we were recently acquired just at the beginning of the year. So we're still kind of going through that discovery process, but some of our new projects that we are actively working on is kind of redesigning our website. Our existing one is still running off of our legacy ERP, and it is long due for being retired.
So e-commerce side of things.
Correct.
Okay.
Except we were meeting with a digital agency, and they were saying like, wow, you're our first e-commerce implementation that won't have e-commerce at the get-go. So we're looking to implement a website without any B2B ordering or anything like that. It's mostly just to display our product information.
Okay.
Well, at this time.
So acquisition sounds positive in that maybe you're not getting rolled up into another organization. You're getting cash to do more fun stuff with.
Pretty much. We're definitely addressing a lot of projects we've been putting on the back burner for a while. So e-commerce is our big adventure, and kind of looking a way to implement a solution to consolidate a lot of our product information and marketing materials all into a nice solution. And then our next biggest thing is finally implementing a WMS fully.
Okay.
So right now, Savant's mostly just handling our order flow of like the pick, pack, and ship. But we're really underutilizing the product.
Quick time check. There's something else I want to ask you about, but are you able to go like another 10 minutes, or do you have something coming up?
Yeah, I can keep going.
I want to ask you on the reporting side of things. So reporting / BI, being a company of your size, are you getting into any of that stuff yet?
We're looking into it now. I've been preaching it every year now since I've been here of we need a BI solution. We need a BI solution. We've even had a demo from DataSelf, but unfortunately the timing lined it up right towards the start of COVID. So that got put on the back burner. So we're now looking at like implementing some like DataSelf or Velixo, especially with the new owners. They're definitely data hungry, and being able to easily produce high quality reports is definitely going to be something we're looking into.
You might have to break out that sandbox again, right? And go with the, let me show you some prototypes.
I'm excited. That's the stuff I love to do.
That's cool. Yeah, I feel like same way. You've gone through the pain, and now that's the reward on the back end to be able to start providing all those interesting metrics.
Exactly. And now we're at a place where we have a lot of good data, because it was hard in the beginning after the implementation, putting out a lot of little fires, and but now that it's matured a bit and we have a lot of good data, I'm really excited to show off like what we can do with the platform.
And when you say good data, I'm curious your experience on this. When I was in-house working with an ERP system, kind of in a similar role, like system administrator role, I initially was always combating the bad data and like attacking it from the bottom up, until I got some help from a friend actually, who he's like, don't worry about that. Just report on it. And then if you report on it and make it visible, that will take care of the problem, because then the managers will get it cleaned up. What's been your experience? Have you found it to be more of you have to clean it up yourself, or you just make it visible and other people take care of it?
Well, a little bit of both. I'm working on making it so that managers will have a bigger role in handling this. Been rolling out a lot of dashboards over like the last year or two of kind of basing it off of the idea of things that shouldn't be happening. And if it's not green, then you need to look at it.
I like that. That helps keep data clean.
Yep. And I even have that just for myself. My homepage is just kind of a lot of like the weird system stuff that you need to monitor for that doesn't happen very often. But I know as soon as one of those is in green, that there's a problem.
That's cool. Oh, that sounds like you're doing a lot of cool stuff over there. What about, do you have other people in your department, or are you the only one who's like full-time on Acumatica?
The one full-time on Acumatica. Might be changing that here soon. We have some people that we're looking to train up and get them more experienced in reporting to kind of split out some of that responsibility and let them kind of target help towards their specific departments.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. Maybe I can also ask you about user groups. So we've had some conversation about this. You have any interest in meeting up with other Acumatica people in the somewhere in Washington, anywhere, wherever they are?
Yeah, excited for user groups, and now that restrictions are starting to get lifted and people are more comfortable meeting in person again, I am always happy to talk about Acumatica with anybody. And that was one of my favorite parts about Summit, was just meeting other customers and talking about it. And
so that your main reason for Summit wasn't the presentations, it was the meeting people one-on-one.
Exactly. And just kind of learning, like, what are you doing? Like, kind of learning about some of the unique things that they've tackled and the solutions that they've looked into, or things that they've shied away from in the past. You can hear some of the horror stories, and it's just nice also seeing that there are other people with the exact same problem as you. It's not just you. There's other people sharing those same troubles.
We'll definitely have to chat after I do this thing on February 24th here in Columbus, Ohio. I'm going to actually put out a podcast episode next week with kind of my thoughts going into it, but I'm not overthinking it. We'll see what people think about it. And I'm even hoping to do some like interviews with people at the user group meeting on the 24th. And then I'll be curious to get your thoughts on, you think it's a format you could do in Washington there?
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. And I want to start hosting some up here too. And a lot of it's just the planning and figuring out the format. And yeah,
I see on your LinkedIn profile, it's Renton. Renton is a Seattle area, right?
Right. Well, so Wilmar's now in Kent, which is just a little bit further south. Okay. But still Seattle area.
And I've been thinking through the logistics as well. Like, how can other people get started? First thing you need is a place. Does Wilmar have a conference room that you could use for it?
We do, depending on how big of an event it's going to be. But yeah, so even if it's just inviting people down to Kent and hanging out in our conference room and just chatting, that's a good start.
You think it can handle like 20 to 30 people in there?
That's pushing it. So unfortunately, we don't have the best facilities for that kind of thing. But we did have a user group meeting back, I want to say in 2019. And it was hosted at Avalara. They opened up their meeting space for us there, and there are a couple ISVs that did presentations. So it was like our own like mini summit essentially.
Oh, that sounds pretty official. How is that in terms of, do you feel like your time there was mostly spent listening to presentations, or did you get those one-on-one interactions that you were looking for?
I didn't get as much of the one-on-one as I wanted. It was probably kind of like a 60-40 split of mostly it's the ISVs talking, and then there was a presentation of whatever like latest like R1 or R2 was coming out at the time. It was like just kind of highlighting some like new features.
Is it warm enough out in the back in the warehouse? Is there enough room back there to get more like 20 to 30 people?
I don't know if they'd appreciate all the forklifts flying around honking.
Interesting. Well, we're gonna have to talk through some logistical ideas because I've been thinking about those same things. I I think I have an idea how to do it here in Columbus, but I don't really know until I try it, see what other people think. But then I'm also just conscious of how could anyone do it anywhere, so I've been thinking through those things. We'll definitely have to chat more about that offline.
Yeah, and that's something I want to focus on is just getting people the resources that they need to just kind of start something yourself. Because if you're just starting out on your own, and it's kind of overwhelming just thinking through the logistics of it. But if someone has a format that you can kind of follow along with, that lowers the barrier of entry quite a bit.
I totally agree. And I think that's also why I like hearing people's personal stories. So thanks for going through that on these podcast episodes, because I think a lot of people get intimidated by systems and they're like, I'm not qualified. But you're another example of many. I'm one of them as well. You didn't walk in qualified, but you had a willingness to roll up your sleeves and you just keep at it. And eventually you know what you're doing in Acumatica, or at least you're comfortable, to then take on new things independently and not feel like you don't belong.
Exactly. And that's always something I'm struggling with, is that kind of imposter syndrome. But looking back on where I started, where I am today, wow.
Yeah, you've done a lot since 2016.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Neil, I appreciate the time today. Thanks for telling your story. And we're definitely going to be in touch here on what's going on this year with local in-person, face-to-face COVID, not quite as scary as it was a couple years ago, user groups in different places.
Yeah, well, I'm excited.
Hey, enjoy the rest of your day and we'll be in touch.
You too. See you, Tim.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of augforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening and take care.